Hello, thank you for joining us here today at AIPH's Green City Briefing, Creating Successful Urban Greening, Planning and Policy. I'm Francesca Boyd and I'm part of the Green City team here at AIPH. Green City projects come in all shapes and sizes, and they have one thing in common: the incredible power of plants to transport and transform spaces and lives. Throughout this 2024-25 briefing series, we will hear from experts and those putting into practice the incredible difference that plants can make to our urban environments. Before we delve into this topic, please could I take the opportunity to remind you of how today's webinar is going to run. First, I will introduce the MC, and this will be followed by our first speaker, after which we will have our second speaker, followed by the move to a discussion section. And this is the point and your opportunity to ask questions and contribute to the discussion. So please, as the presentations progress, do add your questions through the Q&A function found at the bottom of the screen. I would like to also take the opportunity to thank the Worshipful Company of Gardeners for their continued support of the AIPH Green City Briefings programme. Do take the time to find out more about this unique organisation, including by viewing our earlier briefing series, which featured the work of the company based in London. And finally, stay up to date with the latest news, projects, research and initiatives from around the world with the AIPH Green City Global Update. The next issue is due at the end of this month, so do sign up soon so you'll be sure not to miss it. Now, without further delay, please may I introduce our MC for today's webinar. Pietro is an experienced urban and regional planner, skilled in sustainable development, strategic planning, urban planning, feasibility studies, mixed use, and policy design focused on urban regeneration. Currently the managing director of Urbasofa and an expert in urban initiative actions, amongst many other talents. He has a strong interest in city-related business development and holds a doctorate in urban policy design. Pietro is the current ISOCARP president. Thank you so much for being our MC today, Pietro. Over to you.
Thank you, Francesca. And good afternoon from Greece. As Frank introduced me, I'm the president of ISOCARP, the International Society of City and Regional Planner, and this year we will celebrate 60 years of activity. Thank you very much for inviting me to moderate this webinar. And we are going to talk today about planning and policies for creating successful urban greening. We know that green policies, green planning now is at the center of many discussions in urban planning, especially because now we have to focus, we have this challenge of the climate change. But from the very beginning of urban planning, of urban design for cities, we as planners had to deal on how to deal this relationship between the urban fabric, the city fabric, and nature. So from the very beginning, so from the medieval cities, in the Renaissance cities, and I come from Italy, if I can think to the Renaissance cities, to the gardens of Florence, or in the old Rome, but even the garden city of Ebenezer. So during our story of urban planning, we always had the issue. Now we focus this issue on the question of climate change, but this is a strong component of designing the past and contemporary cities. But I don't want to take more time, and I would like to introduce our first speaker, and his name is Pietro Massini from Future Nature Consultancy. Pietro is an experienced green infrastructure strategist, policymaker, and practitioner. 30 years of career working for environmental NGOs, government agencies, and London government. He recently established his own practices in 2021 with, this is the name, Future Nature Consulting, and he advises both public and private sector clients on policies and practices of green infrastructure, nature-based solution, ecosystem services, urban greening, and biodiversity conservation. Pietro also works as an associate technical director for the London Wildlife Trust Consultancy, and he is a part-time lecturer at Greenwich University, teaching ecology module to students of landscape architecture. is even a member of Urban Design Learning's Environmental Design Review panel. So Peter, you do a lot of things as I see from your description. The floor is yours. We are waiting for your presentation. So policy shifts for a changing world, so greening the city. Thank you very much, Peter.
Grazie, Pietro. I'm going to share my screen and I'll go into my presentation. Hopefully this all works well. So as Pietro mentioned, I've been working in ecology and nature conservation in urban environments for over 30 years. And for 10 years, I was the lead on policy for the Greater London Authority around issues around nature conservation and green infrastructure. So I'll focus mostly on the work I was doing in London to talk about how we transitioned from developing policy into sort of practical delivery and some of the issues that we encountered. So I want to start by saying that that London's always had a tradition of being a green city. This is actually Victoria Park in East London, which was created in about 1890 through an act of Parliament to create a green space within the city for the benefit of residents. It was done particularly to provide fresh air for the slums of East London. So that notion of green space as a public benefit has been a long tradition in London for well over 150 years. And even during the Second World War, the end of the Second World War in 1944, the idea of an open space plan for London was being developed and was part of London's first proper city plan, which was the County of London Plan in 1945. And this shows London, how London was going to be envisaged post-war, with a string of existing green spaces, the areas in light green, but the dark green areas were proposed new green spaces, a ring of green spaces around central London, as a part of the post-war regeneration, recognizing the importance of green space, open spaces in a modern major city. Of course, London's population has grown significantly since then. There was a post-war dip, but since the year 2000, the population has grown from about 9 million to somewhere near 12 million now. And the projections are it could be 14, 15 million by 2050. And London has to become a denser city to accommodate that population, but still retain its sort of green credentials. And that obviously poses quite a significant policy problem, how to densify a city while still keeping it green. And of course, the other big sort of external factor that's informing policy moves is climate change. How the climate has changed in recent years and how cities adapt, not just limit their carbon emissions, but adapt to that new condition, adapt to the notion of hotter, drier summers, wetter winters. And London's already experienced in the last few years, heat waves during the summer and very heavy downpours that have caused flooding and other disruption to the city. So as the city grows, as it becomes more dense, it needs to adapt to climate change, and it needs to use its existing green spaces and incorporate more urban greening to ensure London remains a city where you can have a good quality of life and is sustainable in the long term. So over the last 10, 15 years, London has developed a policy framework to try and ensure that that idea of a green infrastructure, parks, green spaces, but also incorporating green elements into new development, is embedded and is promoted through planning policy and other city policy. And it really sort of began back in 2011, so over over 20 years ago now, 15 years ago now, when the first new policy framework for London's green spaces was developed. It was called the All London Green Grid, and it was this concept of understanding that network of green spaces not as isolated parks designed primarily for recreation or conserving some heritage, but thinking about those spaces as a coherent network that could deliver a range of other benefits, adapting to climate change, encouraging active travel by creating new cycle routes through those spaces, as well as the traditional functions of open space, i.e. recreation and the conservation of both built landscape and natural heritage. And the All London Green Grid and the supplementary planning guidance that went with that began to encourage the various local authorities in London, because London's made up of the City Authority and 33 local authorities, to think about how they designed and managed green spaces as an infrastructure that provided all these benefits. And that was consolidated in the London Plan. The London Plan is the spatial development framework for London. It sets out all the planning policies. And for many years, previous iterations of the London Plan was very much focused on protecting green spaces from urban development. And that was a sort of thrust of policy. That's still an important part of the policy framework, protecting those existing green spaces. But the London Plan of 2021 developed a whole range of new green infrastructure policies that began to think about how that existing network, plus new green spaces, plus greening within developments, could work together to address those environmental and social challenges that we recognise were coming down the line in London. So again, thinking much more about this coherent network of infrastructure rather than isolated spaces, and also about how to integrate that with things like sustainable drainage, how we actually drain the city in ways which uses green space rather than pipes to drain the city, and how to encourage developers who are building the new city, building large skyscrapers, large new regenerated housing areas, to incorporate urban greening, things like green roofs, green walls, new trees into that urban fabric, whilst at the same time recognising the urban part of the city was becoming more dense. So the London Plan set a range of planning policies that gave developers and other stakeholders who were designing and building the city ways in which to demonstrate that they were contributing to urban greening. And those of you who don't know the London Plan, it's worth going online and having a look at those green infrastructure policies, the policies we put in place to encourage that transition. And of course, as well as the sort of broad policy framework, the need to provide much more detailed support and guidance for developers, for managers of urban land, to understand how they can incorporate better functioning green spaces into their urban fabric. One of those was the urban greening factor. It's a methodology by which all new developments have to demonstrate they're incorporating a range of green elements, planted elements, whether that's new street trees, gardens, green roofs, green walls, all those features that help transform an urban development into a more sustainable and more vibrant urban space that can address things like climate change, flooding, urban heat, and potentially improve public health. The urban greening factor weights different elements of urban greening So if you're putting in green walls or green roofs, that gives you a higher score than perhaps more traditional landscaping. It encourages things like planting significant street trees or trees in the public realm, and it encourages naturalistic sustainable urban drainage. So the policy and the factor encourages design teams to incorporate as much urban greening into the development as possible. But importantly, it being functional urban greening, it's not just to make the development look pretty, it's there to provide those important functions like drainage, like combating pollution, like reducing the impacts of heat in an urban development. And over the last few years, we and other stakeholders have developed even more sort of detailed guidance about how to deliver some of these urban greening systems. So I just want to tell you a bit more about what that looks like in practice. And I mentioned Victoria Park at the beginning of the presentation, which is the park you can see here on the left-hand side of the image. A park created in Victorian times to provide fresh air for the citizens of London, but something that was designed very much on a very formal sort of landscape of boundary trees, large open spaces, places where you could play sport or promenade or walk the dog. So a very sort of traditional landscape, a parkland landscape. But we're thinking differently now about what a park, what green infrastructure looks like in a city. And on the right-hand side of the image, you can see what is Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. It's the park that was created as part of the Olympics in London in 2012. And you can see it's a very different form of green space compared to the traditional Victoria Park. And I'll quickly sort of take you through that because it's quite a good example of thinking differently about green infrastructure, green space in a city. So originally an area of dereliction, it was full of low-grade industrial use, bus depots, those kind of things, because it had been a sort of industrial part of the city, and that industry had declined over the number of years, and the Olympics gave an opportunity to sort of rethink that space and create a new neighborhood. You can see it's got some rivers running through it, but those rivers were in very defined, harsh concrete channels because they were transport corridors in sort of Victorian times. So a big challenge in terms of transforming a derelict part of the city into something vibrant and new. The first thing that was done was that those rivers which were in concrete channels were broken out of those channels. The sort of metal sheet piling you can see there is a temporary wall as they expanded the river channel to widen it and then flooded that part of the channel. To begin to create a new landscape that was designed not just to be a pleasant space to be, but actually a functional piece of green infrastructure, a place that could accommodate floodwater, that incorporated things like sustainable drainage in the landscape, to be a functional piece of green infrastructure. And the final park, the final new landscape, is a space that can flood during periods of heavy rainfall. It's got lots more connections, walking and cycling routes linking up different parts of the city, as well as also incorporating lots of habitat for wildlife and pleasant green spaces for people. So it's very different from the original sort of traditional parks that were created in Victorian times. It's a piece of green infrastructure, a park for the future. And now the surrounding land is being redeveloped into high density housing. You can see on the left-hand side in the top left-hand corner, that new development there is a piece of new high density housing that's integrated within that parkland landscape. And I'll just touch on that a bit more. So as you walk through Olympic Park, you come across spaces like this, which is a delightful space full of dragonflies and frogs and birds, very close to very high density housing. But this space is not just a nice, pleasant space for wildlife and people. It's actually a functional part of that new urban development. So the new urban development, high density, but it's got things like green roofs, existing new parks, but it's designed to integrate with that parkland landscape in the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. So, for example, when it rains now, that rain falls onto green roofs, collected into pipes, into a sustainable drainage system that runs through that development and ends up in those ponds in the top right-hand corner, which is part of the park landscape. So effectively, the park is not a park in a traditional sense. It's part of that sustainable drainage infrastructure, sustainable drainage network. So it's an integrated, functional piece of landscape rather than being a traditional park. And again, other parks that were designed primarily for recreation and function, being transformed into areas that can accommodate floodwater and wildlife. So this is the same park in 1950 and now 2020, forming a very different function. And we can take that idea of changing the function of a space to transform from grey to green. So as we think differently about how cities work, how we need to use less space for cars, but we still need access to buildings, but we can design in a way that provides access to buildings, but also creates additional green space. But we should also be aware that it's not just greening, it's actually quite a complex engineering problem. These are newly planted trees, doing very well, but they're doing very well because underground, we've created the right conditions to allow them to flourish, i.e. lots of space for roots to grow. But that involves using things like plastic crating, engineered solutions to achieve that. So just going to finally to talk on a few top key issues for how you transition from policy making to practical delivery. Good policy making. Adapt and evolve existing policies and assets. Your existing green spaces are a core resource. Be evidence-based, but also be aware of the political and social context. Policy making is separate from political decision-taking. Ensure your greening policies are relatable. Public health and economic security are more important to most people than climate or nature. Ensure policies can promote and explain the core benefits of urban greening in simple terms. As a practitioner, you might think what they're saying is quite superficial, but actually it's more important to get as many people to understand the benefits of nature and greening than being too precious about precise use of language. And don't be too prescriptive. A good policy framework is a robust framework, not a narrowly defined requirement. Sometimes policy is too finely described. And try to think about second-order issues. What are the unintended consequences? Most policy ends up with unintended consequences. You need to try and think through as many of those as possible from the beginning. And my very final slide, good delivery. Recognize that delivery may be slow at first. People and organizations need to learn new skills and processes. There may be supply chain issues. Thinking about street trees, they're in the ground in a nursery for 5 to 10 years before they're moved into a street. Work with suppliers to encourage innovation. So things like green roofs and green walls require innovation from the market, but also regulation. So things like fire ratings need to be agreed and approved. And it is about collaboration. And that collaboration also requires trade-offs sometimes between the objectives of ecologists, architects, landscape architects, and engineers. And also understand those long-term management needs. Urban greening is an urban infrastructure, provides social and environmental benefits, but it has to be managed and maintained to deliver those benefits. Thank you very much, and sorry for going slightly over time.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your comprehensive presentation, where actually you kept together all the new framework for green policies in London, the issue of the urban growth, of the density, of the new development, of the function and beauty, and you concluded with a good set of recommendations. We don't take the questions now, but we will take the questions after the second presentation. And I would like now to introduce our second speaker, Miss Lyne Mousseau, Head of Environmental Services in Saint-Lazare, Canada. And Lyne is the head of the Environment Service Division in Saint-Lazare, where she initially served as a project manager. Lyne holds a master's degree in environmental sciences and a postgraduate diploma in environmental education from the University du Québec in Montréal. She mainly works involving proposing and participating in the implementation of policies, action plans, and bylaws with the aim of greening the city, protecting the natural environments, and raising public awareness and knowledge on the issue related to the green infrastructure. And of course, climate adaptation, climate mitigation, all topics related to climate change. The presentation of Lyne is on the environmental plan of Saint-Lazare, and it's a very nice title, When the Stars Are Aligned, How Policy and Guidelines Aim at Greening the City Move from Theory to Practice, Context, Issues, and Implementation. Lyne, the floor is yours.
First, good afternoon, and I would like to thank you for inviting us to present our policies and guidelines aimed at greening the city, move from theory to practice. I divided the presentation in 5 sections. The context, findings and issues, planning on going greener, moving into action, and conclusion. First, let's start with the context of natural features of Saint-Lazare. It's located 45 kilometers west of Montreal, and the territory includes large woodlands of ecological importance and biodiversity, with little or no disturbance. So about 37% of the territory is considered forested area. And we also have lots of wetlands, 8% of wetlands. The historical development in Saint-Lazare is pretty recent, so it's nothing compared to London. It's a very small town. Since 1980, when we were about 4,000 people, we're now 23,000 people. The canopy cover is estimated at 63%, and the activities are mostly urban perimeter for 42% of the territory. 37% of the territory is agriculture. We've got equestrian activities for 10%, agriculture equestrian for 6%. It's another type of activity, and conservation. Obviously, population growth has an impact on green spaces and local ecosystems, since large wooded areas have gradually become dotted with single-family homes. We have observed impact on natural areas, on habitat fragmentation and loss of biodiversity. Infrastructure as well were touched by development. With the increase of impermeable surfaces and rainwater management, increased demand for drinking water, especially in spring and summer, mainly due to automatic lawn sprinklers. Here, traditional landscaping of built-up areas consist of trees and uniform grass. These findings these findings have highlighted the need to protect our drinking water sources better by implementing more measures to protect watersheds and recharge areas. Drinking water comes exclusively from groundwater. And to maintain water quality by preserving riparian buffer zones to filter pollutants. The various ecological studies carried out on the territory have also highlighted the importance of maintaining forest ecosystems, since they provide important ecological services, such as, well, you know them, but local climate regulations, wildlife habitat, recreation, etc. And the importance of maintaining tree planting program and woodland restoration programs has grown. We took our inspiration mostly from natural spaces that are surrounding us. It's our main source of inspiration, actually, mainly because of the role they play in biodiversity and ecological resilience. We also count on scientific data, studies on the ecological and economic benefits of greening, and most recently, a new guide produced by the UMQ, which is the like a union of municipalities of Quebec. They've produced a guide adapting to climate change through greening, which is talks about strategies and best practices. Over the years, urban planning bylaws have been considerably modified to better protect natural environments and to reduce the impact of development. A few years ago, zoning and other urban regulations introduced the concept of a holistic approach to environment protection, which has become the key to all our actions and policies, resulting in projects in the protection of all wetlands, a minimum tree density or forested cover on every lot, and increased protection during construction, etc. Other tools have been developed, such as the environmental policy, the conservation plan, sustainable development plan, and we have also produced a guide for our public services. It's not yet it's a greening and ecological management plan. It's not yet adopted, but we're putting in place several measures. Through guides, action plans, policies, and regulations, greening emerges as an accessible and very efficient solution in achieving our goals, such as reducing heat islands, to improve the air quality, to face climate change, and for, of course, residents' well-being. During the planning and implementation of greening initiatives, citizen participation is, we consider it's fundamental for social acceptability and involvement. In 2010, an environmental advisory committee was created. We're also doing public consultation and surveys, and also the importance of circulating the information and incentives. We've got information available on various platforms and use of humor for social change. We are producing the Green Home Guide since 2022. We give tips on ecological landscaping, replacing monocultures of grass, and reducing water consumption. We offer financial incentives for tree planting. Environmental Day in May, we donate trees, compost mulch, seeds, and perennial plants adapted to Saint-Lazare soil and climate. We have an ecological landscaping contest since last year. We have a green squad. We offer free conferences for replacing monocultures of grass, the use of native species, and our squad is it is composed of four students who go from door to door and discuss topics with citizens, environmental topics with citizens. To sum up, we initially put our effort in planning greening and involving citizens so that they would better understand why and how we're doing the greening. We also felt it was very important for the city to participate in a number of significant greening best practices movements, such as Monarch-Friendly City, which is a commitment to protecting monarch habitats. We joined Montreal for Biodiversity from the COP15 last year, which help us integrating biodiversity into territorial and regulatory planning, restore ecosystems and connectivity, integrate biodiversity into governance and frameworks and public policies, which is what we're trying to do. And we also are part of Défi Pissenlit, which is similar to Nomo May that you have in London, I guess. And the types of integrated planting we've done, we're still doing. We have to keep in mind the main holistic guidelines for greening. So it's very important for us to add native vegetation and edible plants, to favor perennial plant species and reduce monoculture of grass, create ecosystems with native plants or plants well adapted to the soil and climate, current and projected. Of course, no invasive plants, with the aim of increasing the ecological services provided by vegetation. And we allow non-invasive vegetation to grow back naturally. We choose plants requiring less maintenance and water, and we tend to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by reducing mowing, watering, etc. Some examples of the plantings we did: edible plantings with fruit gardens and food forests, garden plants, herbs. We even produce a garden favoring fragrant plants in the city center. Ecological restorations with ecosystems inspired by local natural environment, with native trees and plants, for instance, to restore riverbanks. Pollinator plants and rain gardens as well to support pollinators and to better manage rainwater. To move from theory to action and greening the city with innovative practices, we have identified the following key elements as success factors. Scientific data, because we use the use of research to guide decisions. Political will, because without support from elected officials, there wouldn't be any greening. Municipal service involvement, we find that interdepartmental collaboration is essential to succeed. Communication and awareness, the importance of environmental education, ongoing education, strategic planning, considering long-term needs and available resources, human, financial, and material resources on a long-term basis. And contribution of citizens. Like for instance, the Environmental Advisory Committee is still very active and helped a lot in making recommendations and participation to all our many greening aspects of the planning. The city's efforts to beautify green spaces, the quality of landscaping and greening initiatives were recognized last year by Fleuron du Québec, which is an award for greening and urban beautification efforts. And we got 4 Fleuron out of 5, which is pretty good for a first year. And you see my colleague on the picture, and she's, I wish she was there. She works for Public Works, and we've been planning all the greening planning for years. So, and she's she's on the land doing the job. We got, as you mentioned, a certificate of merit from the AIPH World Green City Awards this spring, with a holistic approach to protect and restore forested areas and create biodiverse green spaces in Saint-Lazare. And it also has a community impact, we believe, by the improvement in quality of life and cities' attractiveness as well. And also the interest of other cities to implement similar greening initiatives in our region is also a great recognition, and we're proud of it, actually. And this concludes my presentation, and I thank you for listening. Have a good day.
Thank you, Lyne. Thank you for your presentation. Very interesting one on a best practice, in my opinion. And we see how this best practice of Saint-Lazare is based on good strategic thinking. The support of citizens, so participation is relevant, but even the involvement of public administration, especially the commitment of the municipality, the support of politics, but finally making decision even on evidence-based planning, so considering the scientific data. These are my takeaways from your presentation. And now we can start the Q&A sessions, and I take a look if we have already some questions from the floor, but I don't see any question here. I take a look of the chat. Let me see in the chat. No, then I don't see any question from the floor. I cross-check again, and then I have a question. I have a question for Peter, and I have a question for you, Lyne. I would like to start with the first presentation with Peter. And we saw, Peter, from your presentation that the London plan, the one of 2021, based on the green framework that was of 10 years before, is using the green infrastructure even as an operational tool. That's the impression I had, to manage urban growth and density. My question for you is, have this new methodology had a measurable impact on mitigating and adapting to environmental challenges, especially the contemporary one related to climate change?
Yeah, it has. It certainly has. So I guess the two biggest changes are some of the things I identified in my presentation. So London's got lots and lots of very traditional parks. Some have got great heritage value, the central London parks, but many are very ordinary district parks. And the way London's administered, you have a city authority that sets policy frameworks, and there are 33 local authorities who do the operational day-to-day management of the city, and they own and manage many of those spaces. But there's been a significant investment in changing the nature of those parks, particularly moving away from parks which are large open areas of mown grass for sports, to incorporate lots of things like sustainable drainage, large sustainable drainage areas you can flood in the winter, bringing rivers back into parks. A lot of our parks in London were traditionally in river valleys, but we actually put the rivers in pipes to create the park, because the park needs to be quite a formal space. Those rivers are now being brought back out of pipe to create those big sort of floodable areas that can protect downstream parts of the city. So I used to live in a place called Lewisham in southeast London that used to regularly flood during the winter, but there's been a whole series of projects in parks upstream of Lewisham town centre that enables those parks to flood during the winter, that stops the flooding of the town centre, which is not just an environmental benefit, it's a significant economic benefit because of the cost of the damage caused by flood, and particularly in London, the cost of things like floods. If you get flooded tube stations or railway stations, that has a huge economic impact. So that green infrastructure using parks differently has made a big difference. And the other big change has been about incorporating green elements into new development. So about 20 years ago, the idea of creating a green roof was a very novel idea, and it was done on a very few special developments. That's now become mainstream, and virtually every new development in London has either a green roof, a green wall, or other greening designed in, because it's become normal practice now. It's taken a long time because people need to change the way they think about design. They have to think about those supply chains, who can provide those the equipment and the products you need to install green walls. It's taken a while for that industry to develop, but now it's a sort of flourishing industry that can provide those products for developers. It's become normal now for greening to be integrated into new developments. It's very much focused on new development. It's much more difficult to retrofit, but as the city gets regenerated, those greening elements are incorporated.
Thank you, Peter. I mean, you are introducing the issue of urban regeneration and greening. That is another very important topic. But what I see, and even I understand from your words, and this is very important, no? That now, I mean, green policies are no more an obstacle to urban development that this was perceived in the past, no? But they are a driver. So yeah, a driver for the design of the contemporary cities. They are a very important ingredient to make the contemporary city. I think this is the message that we can leave from your experience in London. Oh, we got a very interesting question in the Q&A session, but I keep it for both of you. I would like now to go to Lyne, and I'm very curious about the role of participation in the plan of environmental plan of Saint-Lazare. How did you involve the citizens, and what are the experiences of co-design, of co-implementation, if there are any that you were considering during the implementation of the green plan? I'm very interested in the community ownership of greening a city. Lyne?
First, the conservation plan. You're talking more about the conservation plan, right? I guess.
I'm talking of the green infrastructure of the city in general. Yeah.
In general.
How did you involve the citizens? Where did you involve the citizens? In which phases? Co-design, co-implementation, just at the beginning of the process? I would like to know more about that.
Well, we're trying to. Since we have the advisory committee, it helps a lot. Those people are really, the people who are participating are usually involved in the design of planning. So for the environmental policy, they were involved. In the conservation plan, they were involved, and with the sustainable development plan, we took other people from people from a few people from the committee, but also from other citizens. So we took a few people from the town, the population, and they are part of the design. So we've got commercial people, we've got regular citizens, and we meet and we're trying to build those plans, actually. Yeah, and that's how they are involved since the beginning. And then we present the plan to the population, and if there are changes or questions, or and the action plans, because the action plans comes with the regular plans, where we hear them. We hear them and we take the comments, and we're evaluating, and it's always close to science. So all decisions, all orientations or decisions are made, but we consider science as a
evidence-based planning.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lyne. I go for this question we got on the Q&A session, and this question is for both of you. It's from Rolf Schutt. He's a planner from Germany and Bolivia. I know him personally. He's a colleague of ISOCARP. And Rolf says, it would be great to know your thoughts about how emerging cities in the South, the global South, I presume, can better balance soil prices, speculation of real estate business, and the minimum recommended green areas per inhabitant. That's quite good and complex question. Who's the first, Lyne or Peter?
Oh, I guess Peter.
Thank you,
Peter.
You're the expert.
It's a
not
really
ladies first, it's men first.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I guess whenever I talk about what we've done in London, I always caveat it by saying London's a very rich city. So a lot of the policies we put in place, a lot of the private developers who might otherwise object to those policies don't strongly object, because land values are high in London, profits on development is high in London, so the amount of the cost of implementing green policies is not really a significant impact on those private developers. In other cities, it's different. I guess there are two things in terms of that question about how cities in the global South might be able to address this issue. Is one, the core assets in London, the core green spaces, are mostly publicly owned, and they're protected through the planning system. There's lots of privately owned land, and that's more under threat from development. But our planning system, and we've had over 150 years of town planning in the UK, so the planning system is quite robust in protecting those core assets. Even privately owned land, it's protected through the planning system as green space, and things like green belt is a quite strong policy framework. And there's strong public and political support to maintain those green spaces, even if they're privately owned. But it is difficult, because even publicly owned green space, there's pressure on that green space to build, particularly as we have to accommodate more and more people in a city. And it's a real challenge. And there's no easy answers, and part of the answer is not around greening policy, it's around housing policy and the balance between privately owned housing, social housing, and the public funding mechanisms to encourage more public housing. We've often been accused in London of greening being sort of gentrification, inflating land values and house prices. That is true, because we've largely got a private housing market. So therefore, you need to institute housing policies to ensure that prices aren't overinflated. And there's also an important point to make, is that everyone should live in a decent quality green environment. It shouldn't be something just for the rich. And to say you shouldn't green because it might inflate housing prices, the issue is housing policy, not greening policy.
Well, thank you, Peter. You went back to the very big classic land use management as housing policy. So we need a mix with this new tool that is the green infrastructure policies that we have to use, maybe, as we said, not as an operational way, as a way of designing the city, and conjugate with the very classic instruments we have: land use management, housing policies. Well, Lyne, do you have a question for an answer for Rolf?
Oh, it's not an answer. It's just adding to what Peter said. I think we have to go step by step and be patient and communicate how important it is to have green spaces for the well-being of everybody. And that's the whole point. We need that. We need that for rainwater management. We need greening for tons of to adapt ourselves to climate change. So, but I think we still have to do a lot of communication, even here, even in my hometown. So it's an ongoing thing. We have to have people know how important greening is and be patient. Go
Yes,
step by step.
That's a very good recommendation. We need time in order to get good results. That's qualities in time. In the time we invest in the planning actions we take, and I would like to thank you, both of you, and all listeners online for staying with us in this webinar. We touch upon very important topics this afternoon in this webinar. This afternoon for me, as I said at the beginning, because I'm in Greece, but I presume that there are people from all over the world. So this evening, this morning for all the others. And it is important, as we saw in these two presentations, that we innovate the approach to the green policies, the green infrastructure. These are new tools. These are new tools that we need for designing the contemporary city. But we cannot use these tools related to, and these new methodologies, detached from the very classic instruments. So a good land use management, good policies for housing, and I would say even for a sustainable and inclusive mobility, that is another important, or energy production, that is another important point of climate change to be addressed in the contemporary city. Before leaving you and giving the floor to Francesca, or Frankie in with a nickname, I would like to remember that this year we celebrate as ISOCARP 60 years of congresses, of global congresses, and we have two major events and are related to the topics that we are discussing here today. The first one is an international conference in the Philippines, so on planning the new regenerative cities, so new towns planned in a regenerative way. So green policies are essential to make this. And our global congress, concluding this year and celebrating the 60 years of ISOCARP, that will be held in Italy, in Siena, working around two main topics: cultural heritage as a driver for sustainable development, but nature-based solution conjugated to cultural heritage, and basically how to use nature-based solution in historical cities, but even in the contemporary modern city. So I would like to invite all the people that join this webinar to join even these two big international events. I think I'm done, Francesca, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, and congratulations on that 60-year celebration. That is incredible. Thank you for joining us today at this AIPH Green City Briefing. We have heard and seen the success that can be achieved through joined up and cross-sector working to transform and inspire our city environments. I would like to thank our speakers, Peter and Lyne, and our MC, Pietro, for the fascinating presentations and wonderful discussion. Thank you both, and all of you, in fact, very much. To the audience, thank you for joining us today, and do be sure to follow us for the rest of the briefing series. After the summer, we will be exploring the planting for managing urban heat topic, and that is in September, so do join us then. If, like me, you've learned something new today, please do share your insight by tagging AIPH Green City on LinkedIn. Additionally, this session has been recorded and it will be available on the AIPH YouTube channel shortly. Finally, I'd like to once again thank our sponsors for the briefing series, the Worshipful Company of Gardeners. Until next time, thank you and goodbye from me and the AIPH Green City team.